Alright, what is going on, guys? I'm TJ, bringing you a brand new video on my channel, and today's video is going to be another NFL draft themed video. I know you guys are probably either tired of that, or maybe you want to see some gameplay, something like that. But I'm really focused on the NFL draft right now. It's only a week away, and I figured I should put out some more content right before the draft so that you guys have a good idea of who's going to be in the draft, you know, prospects that could go in the middle to later rounds, all that good stuff, and so that you guys could watch some more of my content before the NFL draft actually starts. I'll probably be putting out a mock draft with trades in probably later this week, maybe like on Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. But today's video is going to be a position rankings video. We're going to go through and we're going to rank the top 5 NFL draft prospects at each position. So we're going to be going the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL draft, the top 5 running backs in the NFL draft, and we're going to go down the list at every position, leaving out offensive linemen because it's boring to talk about them, and I do enough film study on them. I don't want to have to bore you guys with that, so I'm going to give you guys the exciting positions. Linemen do matter, but just not for the sake of this video. They matter to me, but they probably don't matter as much to you guys. So with all that being said, let's jump right into the video. Alright, so we are going to be starting out on the offensive side of the ball with the quarterback position, a position that in this year's draft is kind of, you know, up for grabs. There's a lot of people who think Dwayne Haskins is the best overall quarterback by far. There's a lot of people that think it's Kyler Murray. Some people think Drew Lock. There's a lot of debate going on, but these are my top 5 guys. I've got Dwayne Haskins at 1, Drew Lock at 2, Kyler Murray at 3, Will Grier at 4, and Daniel Jones at 5. To me, Kyler Murray is probably the best playmaking quarterback in this draft, but I just have real concerns about his size. I know that, you know, Baker Mayfield, Drew Brees, yada yada yada, short guys can succeed in the NFL, Russell Wilson, but he's like, Baker Mayfield's like 6'1" on a good day, Kyler Murray's like 5'9", and I've said this before in my mock draft videos. I just don't know if I can trust him to succeed a lot at the NFL level. I'm sure he will in the right system with the right coach and the right players around him. I'm sure he'll succeed, but him being at 3 is a popular position for him to be at. Dwayne Haskins at 1. I think Drew Lock is probably a better day 1 guy, but Dwayne Haskins probably needs to sit behind a veteran quarterback and learn. Maybe in a place like New York is where he can do that very well. Miami behind Ryan Fitzpatrick if he falls to that spot. Those would be good things for him, but he's probably the more, you know, long-term guy. He's going to be the Patty Mahomes of this draft class, even though he's not going to be, even though Patty wasn't the first quarterback taken, he was by far the best quarterback from that 2017 draft class in his second year. But Drew Lock is going to be more of the Mitch Trubisky type, a guy that they asked to start day 1, a guy that they're going to rely on to lead them, whatever team drafts him, to some playoff success maybe in the next couple years. A team like the Redskins could really go after him, but I think he's the second best. Will Grier is a surprise top 5, maybe for a lot of people. A lot of people think it's Tyree Jackson or Ryan Finley. I think Will Grier is very good. In my quarterback ranking video at the beginning of the year, or like at the beginning of the draft season, he was at number 1, and then I had Justin Herbert at number 1 at one point, and then Dwayne Haskins came through because Will Grier kind of for me fell off a little bit. His age is kind of a question because I think he's going to be 23. He's kind of got the Baker Mayfield situation where he had to transfer, sit out a year, all that type of stuff. And then Daniel Jones at number 5. I had him, even though he is the 5th quarterback on this list, he was in the first round of my mock draft. I'm very sure of the one that I just posted. I think the Giants took him at 16 or 17. 17 was the pick that I had him taking them at, and that might confuse some people because I don't have him as, you know, the 3rd best quarterback. So why would he be the 3rd quarterback taken or the 4th quarterback taken? Whatever the case was, I feel like Will Grier is better than him. Daniel Jones is much like Dwayne Haskins in the fact that he's probably a safer pick than a guy like Kyler Murray, Will Grier, or Drew Lock, because those guys are more, you know, erratic. They're not as fundamentally sound as a guy like Dwayne Haskins or Daniel Jones, but I do like the way that the NFL is moving where you don't have to be as fundamentally sound at the quarterback position. You can take a lot of risks. You can get outside of the pocket. You can throw off platform. You can do all that stuff, and that's why I think guys like Drew Lock, Kyler Murray, and Will Grier will be above Daniel Jones in my ranking system, but I feel like in the draft, Daniel Jones has a possibility to go before, you know, all of those guys. It just depends on what team is, you know, I don't want to say stupid enough, but what team is going to be bold enough to take him ahead of all the other guys on this list. Moving on to the running backs, I have Josh Jacobs at number 1, David Montgomery at number 2, Darrell Henderson out of Memphis at 3, Miles Sanders from Penn State at 4, and at number 5, I have Justice Hill from Oklahoma State, the combine warrior out of the running back group this year. Josh Jacobs is pretty much everybody's number 1 consensus running back, and I have to agree with that, not because it's just what everybody else is saying, but because his tape stands out a lot more than these other guys. David Montgomery's tape is very similar, but he doesn't have the home run hitting ability that Josh Jacobs has. They're very similar players. They run pinball style. They can run in between the tackles. They can bounce it effectively. I think David Montgomery forced the most missed tackles in the entire FBS this year, and last year he was like number 2. Darrell Henderson's a guy who can just get by you. He's quick. He hits the outside and he's gone. If you give him a gap, he's going to take it to the house every single time. Miles Sanders is a guy that, you know, backed up Saquon Barkley at Penn State, and he did very good in that time with that rotation, you know, when Saquon wasn't on the field, which was barely any. But he showed out a lot. These Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, and Miles Sanders are very similar. They're guys who can run between the tackles. They can make you bounce off of them, but they can also make you miss at the second level and on the outside. And then there's guys like Justice Hill and Darrell Henderson who are very similar, guys who came from high scoring, high power offenses, who ran a lot of zone, a lot of counter, not a lot of power like some of these other schools like Iowa State and Alabama did. But they come from that zone read type offense. Not necessarily zone read for Justice Hill or Darrell Henderson, not necessarily like zone read, but, you know, a very heavy zone running scheme. And these are guys that are home run hitters. So the 3 and 5 spot are just home run hitting guys, good 40 times, good acceleration, good explosion. And if they get vertical, then they're gone. And then 1, 2, and 4, those are guys who can, you know, bounce you in between the tackles. They're just going to make dudes miss. They did it in college. I feel like they can do it at the next level. And these are the running back rankings. Moving on to the tight ends. At number 1 and 2, we've got the Iowa duo of TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant. Irv Smith Jr. from Alabama comes in at number 3. Josh Oliver from San Jose State comes in at 4. And at 5, I have Dawson Knox from Ole Miss. TJ Hawkinson, to me, is the most well-rounded tight end in this class. He's a guy who can run block very effectively. He can get open on the route. He doesn't need, you know, a rub or anything like that to get open. He's got strong hands. He can make plays with his feet after the catch. He's an all-around a great tight end. And then at number 2 is his running mate at Iowa, Noah Fant. Noah Fant, watching his tape was what brought to light TJ Hawkinson for me. I saw that he was a physical run blocker and all that type of stuff, but Noah Fant is more of the vertical stretch the field type guy. He's not as good at run blocking, but he is a very, very big playmaker, and he was I don't want to say he was a bigger playmaker for that Iowa offense, because both of these guys contributed a lot. But to me in the NFL, TJ Hawkinson is more of the intermediate, over the middle type guy. He's tough. He can make dudes miss at the second level. Noah Fant to me is more of like, you can stick him in the slot, you know, he can stretch the field, he can do all that. TJ Hawkinson can, but I feel like Noah Fant is a guy who can do that better. Irv Smith at number 3. I thought about switching him and Josh Oliver, but Irv Smith's tape was just very, very good. He's got strong hands, he can run routes very well, and he's a guy kind of like Noah Fant who can just take it to the house. He's got quick speed with the ball in his hands. He's not like a possession tight end or anything like that. My concern with Irv Smith is if he was like 6'5", 6'6", he'd be the best tight end in this class by far, but it's the fact that I think he's only like 6'2", 6'2 and a half, maybe 6'3". That's what to me hurts his stock a little bit, because he's built like a wide receiver, but he has tight end speed. So it's kind of like the Devin Funchess situation. Devin Funchess played tight end at Michigan, and he was like 6'3", 6'4", and then he decided to transition to wide receiver at the NFL because of his frame. I could see Irv Smith doing that, but he'll probably stay at tight end. Josh Oliver is my number 4 tight end on this board. The 4 and 5 spot, probably a lot of people haven't really heard of. They're 2 of my favorite players in this draft class. Josh Oliver from San Jose State. They suck. San Jose State sucks, but Josh Oliver was like the one bright spot. He's a guy who can go over the middle, go up, get vertical, grab a ball for you. He's tough. He's physical. Not the best run blocker, but that can always be improved at the next level. You know, once he gets in the weight room, puts some weight on, and they teach him how to run block properly. But he was the number 1 threat for that San Jose State offense, and they had to get him the ball as much as they could. So why waste, you know, snaps trying to get him to run block when they need to get him the ball to like win the game essentially? And then Dawson Knox out of Ole Miss. You know, he was part of that NWO, the nasty wideouts. Not really, but you know, it still amazes me. I say this every time I talk about an Ole Miss prospect, how they didn't score 1.5 million points a game. You have DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, DeMarcus Lodge, and Dawson Knox, and you like lose almost every single game. I think they only won like 4 or 5 games this year. It was absolutely insane. That just shows the ineptitude of that coaching staff and of Jordan Ta'amu, who isn't really that good of a quarterback. But Dawson Knox, he's a strong-handed tight end. He reminds me a lot of Travis Kelce, but in terms of the athletic ability and, you know, the run after the catch ability, not so much. He just reminds me of Travis Kelce in the way that he positions his body, his strong hands, going up and getting all the balls balls that he can. You know, this tight end class is kind of weird because there's not a lot of huge dudes in it. Like Travis Kelce's class, he's like 6'6", 6'7". There's a lot of those dudes in the NFL right now, but I don't think any of the guys that are on this top 5 are over 6'6". You know, Zach Gentry out of Michigan is like 6'8", so he's like the one big body in the class. But outside of that, there's not a lot of height in this class, but I feel like that's kind of the position, the way that the NFL is moving. Smaller, quicker, you know, more agile tight ends to just add to the receiving game instead of getting a bunch of big bodies who can block. But those guys will still have value in this draft class. And now we're on to the wide receivers, probably my second favorite group of players or position in this year's draft class on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, you know, because of my bias to Mizzou and Drew Lock and all that stuff, that's going to be the number 1 position, but this is probably my second favorite position. At number 1, I've got DK Metcalf from Ole Miss. At number 2, I've got AJ Brown from Ole Miss. At number 3, I have N'Keal Harry from ASU, Arizona State. At number 4, Marquise Brown from Oklahoma. And I have Deebo Samuel from South Carolina at number 5. I mean, it's pretty obvious that DK Metcalf is the best wide receiver in this class. Is he the most technical? No. Are his hands 100% the best? No. But the fact that he is as big as he is, moves as quick as he does, and still has the ability to get choppy with his feet and make good cuts on routes, it's a really good thing. You know, I talked about it in my mock draft video when I think I had him going number 7 to Jacksonville, or in that range, either to Buffalo or Jacksonville is where I had him going. And I said that he doesn't need to be the most technical. He doesn't need to be, you know, a guy like Julian Edelman who's, you know, a savvy route runner. He doesn't need to be, you know, a small slot guy with quick hips and quick feet, because he is so freaking big that he can just run a slant and wall the dude off. Oh, and by the way, if he sets up the slant and the guy bites, he's going, you know, 85 yards down the field for a touchdown. And that's just how it's going to be. He can hit home runs over the top. He can make contested catches over the middle. He can take slants to the house. He's a do-it-all receiver. He's not the most technical, but he is the biggest playmaker, arguably, in this draft class, and that's why I have him at number 1. At number 2, his running mate at Ole Miss, AJ Brown, a guy who's really good in the slot, has really strong hands, can stretch the field too, but isn't the fastest. He doesn't have that same speed that DK Metcalf does, or that some of the other guys in this draft class do. But he, I would say, is probably the most technically sound receiver in this class. He's a big body dude, and you wouldn't think that he'd be the best at running routes, but he is very, very good. He gets down, he drops his hips, he lowers his shoulders into every single route. He does his best. Very Calvin Ridley-esque in his route running, but he's got some beef on him, so, you know, he's able to go over the middle better and make more contested catches. At number 3, my favorite wide receiver in this draft class, arguably. I think there's some other guys, you know, deeper in the draft that I like a little bit more, but N'Keal Harry out of Arizona State. He's a big body dude. He's like 6'4". I think he ran like a 4.58 at the combine, or like in that range, and that speed doesn't really reflect how fast he plays on the field. He can make any catch he wants to. He plays with more of like, you know, a 4.45 speed rather than like almost a 4.6. He makes dudes miss for how big he is. It's surprising how well he moves, and I think a lot of people are going to sleep on him. He may end up falling out of the first round, but I think that if a team is smart enough, they'll pick him up to be their deep threat jump ball wide receiver. Marquise Brown out of Oklahoma comes in at number 4. To me, if he was a better route runner and he didn't have the injury questions, he'd probably be the number 2 wide receiver in this draft class, but he isn't as good as at running routes. I just messed that up. He isn't as good at running routes as I'd like him to be. He rounds off a lot of stuff. He doesn't plant his foot. He just kind of, you know, he doesn't like jog routes, obviously, but he doesn't set them up very well, and he struggles getting open, and a lot of the time he just has to rely on his speed and, you know, just the ability to stretch the field to get him open rather than his technicality. You know, kind of a Deshaun Jackson type, but I felt like Deshaun Jackson was a better route runner, at least in the NFL, and coming out of Cal, he probably was, even though I haven't watched much Cal Deshaun Jackson tape lately. And at number 5, I have Deebo Samuel out of South Carolina. He's a guy that I really like too, a guy that really jumped off my board after watching some tape. I think he's one of the best route runners in this class. It's got to be between him, AJ Brown, Keelan Dawson's a good route runner, Anthony Johnson's a good route runner out of Buffalo, but Deebo Samuel is a do-it-all type guy. He's a guy that can return kicks and punts for you. He can stretch the field deep. He did run a 4.5 flat at the combine. I think that was his best time, but he's a dude that can still stretch the field. He can get open, and it's not like his 4.3, he doesn't have 4.33 speed, but it's his route running and the ability to set up different routes that gets him open, because he can sell a post and it's going to be a fade, or he's going to sell a dig and it'll be a comeback or something like that. That's not like a really good combo, but you get what I'm saying. He's very well rounded, probably next to AJ Brown, the most well-rounded prospect in this class. He's very similar to AJ Brown. His hands are a little bit inconsistent, but I mean, there's always time, you know, you can always improve on that. To me, the 4 and 5 spots aren't probably first round picks. N'Keal Harry could slip in there, Marquise Brown could slip in there. It just depends on how much a certain team values them. I feel like a team, if you know Marquise Brown is still there at 26, 27, could trade back up into the first round, or a team could pick him up with, you know, a later pick in the draft. But to me, Deebo Samuel probably won't go in the first round, but this is a very, very strong class and a very strong top 5 wide receiver group. All right, we are done with the offensive prospects. Moving on to the defensive prospects, which by far and away have the more talent, the more prospects, the deeper prospects. You know, it's just all around a better defensive class than it is an offensive class. Granted, there are very good players on offense, but it's a very top heavy class, especially in the wide receiver department. I mean, wide receivers are going to go and there's going to be a lot taken, but the talent is pretty top heavy in that wide receiver class. So on defense, we're starting out with edge rushers. These are guys obviously that are going to be 4-3 ends or 3-4 outside linebackers. At number 1, Nick Bosa out of Ohio State. At number 2, I have Josh Allen out of Kentucky. Number 3 is my boy Rashawn Gary out of Michigan. Montez Sweat from Mississippi State comes in at 4, and Brian Burns from Florida State comes in at number 5. This is a pretty consensus list, I feel, for everybody who has, you know, watched enough tape for the edge prospects in this draft. Nick Bosa is pretty much the best edge defender. He's got very good hands. He's not as solid in the run game, and he doesn't have a long reach. He's a guy who uses his technicality, knows how to use his body to get by the offensive tackles and to make plays in the backfield in the run game and in the pass game. Josh Allen is probably the most versatile pass rusher on this list, mainly because he's a guy who can play 3-4 end, or not 3-4 end, but 3-4 outside linebacker. He can play nickel middle linebacker. He can play dime middle linebacker. He's a guy who's athletic enough to make plays in coverage and also get after the quarterback. Rashawn Gary at number 3 didn't have a ton of production at Michigan, but he's a guy who shows a lot of athletic potential. He shows a lot of hustle. He shows a lot of heart. He plays with a very, very high motor. Very reminiscent of how Bradley Chubb was last year, but Bradley Chubb was a little bit more coordinated and put together and had a lot of production. You know, he was the sack leader at NC State for a career. Rashawn Gary didn't have that production. He was hurt a little bit. There was a ton of talent on that defensive line early in his career. Guys like Chris Wormley, Taco Fall, Maurice Hurst, all that type of stuff. So he got a chance to shine this year, but unfortunately he was hurt for a couple of games, and I don't think that hurt his draft stock necessarily, mainly because he has some traits that a lot of these other guys don't. Montez Sweat, the combine warrior out of this group, ran a 4.41 at the combine, you know, has an amazing wingspan. He's super tall. He's a do-it-all end. He's a guy who can rush the passer. He's got to me, he just has to develop a lot more, or just more pass rushing moves. You know, I didn't see him use the long arm technique a lot. I saw him rely just on pure strength and raw athletic ability, and just the fact that he was better than the dudes that he was going up against, and that's why he succeeded a lot. But in the NFL, those dudes are going to be better than you. Maybe on occasion you're going to face a guy who's just a pile of dog crap, but to me, he's not higher on the list because he has to develop a little bit more pass rush, you know, arsenal. He has some moves that he's very good at, which is like the bull rush. He extends his arms very well, but if he can add a couple more moves, he'll be unstoppable. And then Brian Burns is probably the best speed rusher in this class. He's got a lot of good traits that a lot of people like. To me, he probably won't go in the first round. I feel like people think that Clelin Ferrell out of Clemson is a better prospect, but to me, Brian Burns, if you need a guy to get after the quarterback, he's your guy. He's going to do it. He's going to do it at 100%. He's going to collapse the pocket, allow for your interior defensive lineman to step up and make plays, and that's what you want out of an edge rusher. And then when you get pressure from the middle, because that's where they're focusing when Brian Burns is going to be, you know, making the Q step up in the pocket, and then they're going to be pressuring from the middle. Once they focus on that, he's just going to have a heyday, and he's going to go off for your defense. Moving on to the interior defensive linemen. Like I said, the edge rushers are going to be guys who can play 4-3 defensive end and 3-4 outside linebacker. The interior defensive linemen are going to be guys who can play 4-3 D tackle, 3-4 nose tackle, and 3-4 defensive ends. Starting off at number 1, Quinnen Williams out of Alabama. At number 2, I've got Ed Oliver out of Houston. Number 3, Jeffrey Simmons out of Mississippi State. Mississippi State has some dogs, man. They got some dogs on their defensive side of the ball. At number 4, I've got Dexter Lawrence out of Clemson. And at number 5, I have Draymond Jones out of Ohio State. Quinnen Williams just wreaked havoc over everybody that he played last year. Didn't matter who he was lining up against. He was getting double teamed a lot of the time, and he was still making plays in the backfield, beating double teams consistently. You know, he still has a lot of time to grow. Not a lot of time, but he still has a body to grow into. Like, he's still got a lot of, he's not like a toned defensive tackle, but he's not like fat. It just looks like he's got a lot of baby fat on him, and if he can get that situated right, then he'll be the most dominant, you know, defensive tackle that we've seen in a while, maybe next to Aaron Donald. Ed Oliver, a guy that's also compared to Aaron Donald, I can see it, but he's not. I mean, there's like Twitter clips of him doing 3 cones and ball catches and stuff like that, but he's not just as physically dominating as Aaron Donald is. I get the comparisons because they've played very similar in college, but at the NFL, at the next level, Aaron Donald is just an animal. But Ed Oliver is versatile. You know, I think he'd be a good fit in a place like Minnesota, who runs a lot of odd defensive schemes. That puts him on the nose tackle, over the guard, or not over the nose tackle, but at nose tackle. You can play him at the 3, the 4, and if you want to get crazy, play him at the 5 or outside the tackle or the 9 tech or something like that. Jeffrey Simmons would probably be the number 2 player in my draft if he hadn't, or not in my draft, but in the prospect rankings, if he hadn't have torn his ACL. That's a huge injury, and the fact that he's even still the number 3, or my number 3 interior defensive lineman, shows how dominant he was. He was just an absolute beast on the inside of that Mississippi State defensive line this year. You know, people talked about him last year. He could come out, he couldn't, but this year he just showed that, God, he could be a top 2 player. I think that he possibly had, you know, the potential to be the number 1 player, but he has some effort issues. He takes plays off here and there, but this dude's going to be a beast at the next level. Dexter Lawrence at number 4. I talked in my mock draft about how there's a lot of teams in the NFL, or the NFL, just front offices, coaches, GMs, value him a lot higher than the media does. He's not a sexy player. He's not, you know, Christian Wilkins, who's, you know, athletic for his size, and he's a guy who, you know, runs all over the field and stuff like that. Dexter Lawrence is a dirty dude. He eats up bodies in the middle of that defensive front. He sheds blockers. I think he had the highest bench press at the combine, and that shows in his play as well. He's very good at shedding, very good at filling up holes. You know, he's just, you know, the guy that you want on the inside of that defensive line. If you want your linebackers to be the guys running around making plays, you want Dexter Lawrence on your defensive line. And then Draymond Jones out of Ohio State, another defensive lineman from Ohio State, cracking the top 5 for his position rankings. I thought about Christian Wilkins here, Jerry Tillery, a couple other players, but Draymond Jones to me was probably the best out of those 3 guys that I considered putting here. He's got long arms, he's got a big frame, he's tall, he can swat passes, he's good in the pass rush and in the run game, probably excels more in the pass rush. He's a guy that is kind of like Chris Jones. He could play a 3-4 D end, and I feel like that's where he would be most successful. Watching Nick Bosa's tape, he was the guy on that defense that stood out the next most, and he was very good for that Ohio State Buckeyes team in Nick Bosa's absence this year. Moving on to the linebackers, this is a linebacker class that's very top heavy, and the talent trails off, but I mean, there's always going to be guys who are going to be good special teamers, are going to be good sub-package guys, but the 3 down linebackers are very limited in this class, and there's not a lot of talent just spread throughout. And it hasn't been like that. I mean, it has been like that for a while. There hasn't been a super great linebacker class in a while. But enough about previous years. We're sticking on the 2019 NFL Draft. At number 1, my boy Devin Bush out of Michigan. And I'll talk about, you know, why he's at number 1 later, obviously. Devin White out of LSU at number 2. Mac Wilson out of Alabama at number 3. Tavon Coney from Notre Dame at number 4. And out of NC State, Jermaine Pratt at number 5. Devin Bush, to me, is the best linebacker in the class, not because I'm a Michigan fan and not because I watched all of his games. I watched pretty much all these dudes' games from this year, trying to break down their tape and what they're good at, what they're bad at, and all that stuff. But Devin Bush is just the best linebacker in the class. He's got, you know, Devin White ran a faster 40, but the 40 doesn't matter if, you know, your footwork is bad and you're taking negative steps every time that a play happens. Devin Bush is downhill, he's quick, he's fast, he's get after the ball. He's like a shark to blood, man, you know, and that ball carrier is blood. He's going and he's trying to find that blood and he's trying to get all over it, man. And in coverage, he's very good. He can carry running backs quarterbacks down the field. He can carry tight ends. He can blitz very, very well. He's a secure tackler. He's great on the edges. He's great in the box. The one concern is his overall size, but I feel like in the Big Ten, those dudes on those offensive lines are huge. They're monsters, and he did very, very well against them. I don't feel like there's any questions to me with Devin Bush. At number 2, Devin White out of LSU, a guy who's got a lot of upside, but he's still pretty raw. A guy who's probably going to go before Devin Bush, mainly because he's got the elite speed. He's got very good coverage ability, but to me, he's just way too raw of a prospect. I like Devin Bush way more, but Devin White is probably going to go before him. Mack Wilson out of Alabama played very similar to how Rashaan Evans played. Less of a blitzer, better in coverage, I would say. He's a guy who is a very good thumper on the inside of that, that front seven. He's a guy who's going to fill holes quick, fast, and hard. He's not very great on the edges, but he can still make plays out there, and I feel like he'll be good in the next level regardless of, his consistency to make plays on the edges or not. Tavon Coney at number 4. He's a guy who played very, very well in the first game of the season against Michigan. He kind of trailed off a little bit. He had some really good games and some really bad games. I'd say his consistency is probably my thing. A lot of these guys, the top 3 guys, they had consistent games all year where they were really, really good. Tavon Coney showed promises of being a top 3 linebacker, and then there were times where he showed that he couldn't even be in the top 5 just because of the inconsistencies. He is a very good linebacker, though. He's good in coverage, and he can fill downhill, and he can hit. He's very instinctive, and I like that in a linebacker. You need that to be a good linebacker in the NFL. And then Jermaine Pratt is kind of in the same realm that Devin White is in. A very raw linebacker prospect. Devin White, if you guys don't know, transitioned from running back at LSU to play linebacker, and Jermaine Pratt was a safety at NC State, and he decided to take his talents down into the box and play linebacker. He's got good size and good athleticism, but to me, his physicality is a little bit lacking, and his footwork is not as good as you'd want it to be for a linebacker. I'd like to see him be more aggressive, and if he was more aggressive and his footwork was better, then he'd be a better prospect, but obviously that's why he's at number 5. Next up, we have the cornerbacks. At number 1, Greedy Williams out of LSU. At number 2, I've got DeAndre Baker out of Georgia. Number 3, out of Washington, I've got Byron Murphy. Rock Ya-Sin from Temple at number 4, and Amani Oruwariye, I think that's how you say it, I'm not sure, but he is at number 5. I'd say that this is most everybody's top 5 in terms of draft analysts. The big names and the small names. There may be some other guys that creep in here like David Long. A lot of people like him. But to me, these are the best 5 guys in this draft class. At least guys who have a chance to go in the first round. All these dudes could go in the first round. These could be 5 corners that go in the first round, but I would bet on Amani probably not to go in the first round, but that's neither here nor there. Greedy Williams, very fitting for a cornerback to have the name Greedy, a guy who's going to go after the ball, make plays on the ball. He's got a good frame. His weight is a little bit of a concern. If he could get up to 205, 210, maybe fill himself out a little more, I think that he'd be very, very good. Kind of has not the same concerns that Dante Jackson did, but in terms of weight, they kind of both have the same concerns, both coming out of LSU in back-to-back years. DeAndre Baker, the 2018 Jim Thorpe Award winner, a guy who's very good in man, very good in zone. He can make plays on the ball, even if it's not thrown directly at him. He can go and he can track the ball. Very safety-esque in that regard. Byron Murphy, probably the most technically sound cornerback in this class. He's a guy who you're not going to beat him deep every time. He's got good hips, good hands, a physical corner. He can help in the run game as well. Probably the most well-rounded corner in this class. And probably the second most well-rounded corner in this class is Rock Ya-Sin, a guy who's got really good feet, really good hips, really good hands, a lot like Byron Murphy. He's a little bit I think Byron Murphy ran like a 4.54 and Rock Ya-Sin ran a 4.5. Rock Ya-Sin's 6'2". He's about 215, 210 pounds. He's a guy who's going to put his hands on you. He can also make plays on the ball, and that's something that he has that Byron Murphy doesn't. I do think that Byron Murphy is just more technically sound than Rock is. He doesn't let dudes beat him all the time, and Rock kind of lets that happen from time to time, which is okay, but Byron Murphy was just a shutdown dude this year. And Amani Oruwariye, I think that's how you pronounce it. I probably said it different than I did the first time, but he's a dude that reminds me a lot of AJ Boye. He's a long corner. He's about 6'1", 210. He's probably closer to 6'2" than he is 6'1", but he's long. He likes to press. He's a physical corner. These bottom 3 guys are very physical corners. Greedy Williams can be, but he kind of gets bullied around a little bit by bigger wide receivers. I think he will at the next level at least, but these bottom 3 guys are dudes that are very good outside corners, guys who are going to hit you. They're going to hit you in the mouth. They're going to run with you. They have the ability to do both, and that's something that's really, really valued in today's NFL. And the last group, but certainly not the least group, and certainly not the least talented group that we are going to be going over today, is the safety position. This is my favorite group in the entire draft class. I mean, there are quarterbacks that I like, there are tight ends that I really like, but to me, just watching this safety class this year has been the most fun I've had watching tape. I know I've only been heavily watching tape for the past 2 years, and last year I watched way more offense than I did defense, but this year, watching these dudes, I mean, it was just fun to watch tape. And some dudes don't have fun, you know, it's like a grind and they're like, oh, I gotta watch tape, but watching these dudes play was just, it was a blast. Starting off at number 1, I have Johnathan Abram out of Mississippi State, Darnell Savage out of Maryland at 2, Nasir Adderley at 3 out of Delaware, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson from Florida at number 4, and rounding out the top 5 safeties is Taylor Rapp out of Washington. To me, Johnathan Abram, there's a lot of people who think it's, you know, Nasir Adderley or Chauncey Gardner-Johnson or Taylor Rapp who are the number 1 overalls, but I think it's Johnathan Abram by far and away. He does have some coverage inconsistencies, but he's a dude who's got probably the highest motor in this draft class. He loves running downhill. He loves hitting you in the mouth. He loves talking trash. He loves making plays. He's a dude that you want on your team. If you need a guy, if you're a team and the safety that you have on your team is a rangy free safety type, you want Johnathan Abram to be the guy running around trying to take dudes' heads off, and he will do that. He did it in college. He'll do it at the next level. He's good in the slot. He's good, you know, in the dime linebacker, nickel linebacker position. He's good in too high. He can make plays on the ball deep down the field, short in the flat. He can do it all, man. Darnell Savage Jr. out of Maryland at number 2. Very similar to Johnathan Abram in his versatility, but he's not nearly as physical, and his support in the run game isn't quite there. His angles aren't that good, so it kind of gets him out of the play from time to time, but he's still a very good safety. He can cover in the 2 high, in the 1 high, in the slot, in the nickel. He can do all of that, and he's a little bit more rangy. He's a little bit taller. He's a little bit more long, so that helps him out in terms of making plays on the ball and stuff like that. Speaking of long and rangy, Nasir Adderley is probably the best free safety prospect in this draft. He's not a guy that you want to put at strong safety. You want him playing your middle third, you know, your hook curl zones, cover 2 zones. You want him playing deep down the field. You want him to be able to get good angles on the ball, turn his hips, and get to the ball fast to make plays on it. That's what he did at Delaware. He's good in run support too, but he gets a little bit aggressive, and he kind of takes himself out of the play, and he also isn't the best tackler, but he's probably the best true free safety in the class. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, that's a mouthful right there. He's a guy who's very good in the nickel, spent a lot of his time playing nickel. He played it pretty much exclusively in the bowl game that against Michigan this year. Was that the Outback Bowl? I can't remember what bowl. No, that was the Peach Bowl. I think it was like the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl is that's what it was. But he's a guy who's played a ton of slot corner. He can also play, you know, dime linebacker, nickel linebacker. He can play in the 1 and the 2 high, but I'd say that his best position is probably either in the 2 high or in the slot. He's not that big. He's not that physical, but he's a very good playmaker. He's going to get you interceptions, and he's going to do something with the ball after the fact. And Taylor Rapp out of Washington rounding out the video and the top 5 of the safety class. He's a guy who I don't know why a lot of people think that he's the number 1 safety, because it's just not there. It may be the fact that Washington decided to play him like 25 yards off the ball, but he's a good playmaker in the pass game. He's a physical big hitter in the run game. I just feel like there are better positions to play him at, and Washington didn't necessarily utilize him that way. If he gets on a team that knows how to put him in the best positions closer to the ball where I think he belongs best, then I think he'll be better in the NFL than he was at college. But if he gets on a team where they want to stick him in the 2 and the 1 high, then I don't think he'll be that good. He is a very good prospect though, just underutilized. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy the video. I really do appreciate your support, and it does help the channel grow, believe it or not. And down in the comments section, let me know what you thought about the video. Do you think somebody was too high, too low? Did I leave somebody out that you thought should have been in one of the position rankings? Let me know down in the comment section below. And like I said at the beginning of the video, the NFL draft is only a week and a couple days away. There will be more content coming out. One more mock draft for sure. Maybe a second one. I'm not sure about it yet. And then a couple other videos going over some overrated and underrated prospects. But anyways, that's going to do it for me, guys. I'm TJ, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.